Muted.
Hello, welcome to the Building State P-3 Systems Learning from Leading States webinar. My name is Shannon Riley-Ayers, and on behalf of the planning team, we're happy you've taken time out of your day to join us for an information session provided by the Center on Enhancing Early Learning Outcomes. CELO is part of the federally funded Comprehensive Center Network and is charged to build state education capacity to implement policies for children from birth to grade 3. We do this with a stellar team led by a partnership between NEAR, EDC, and CCSSO. Just a few things to make this a successful webinar. On the next slide, you'll see some logistics. Note that your lines are muted since we have a large turnout for this meeting. Enter any questions you have or comments into the chat box you see on your screen at any time. We will have time at the end of the webinar to address some questions. If you have any technical assistance needs, please contact Melissa Daween, and you see her contact information there. We will be recording this webinar, and it will be posted on the website at celo.org. Today I'm happy to introduce David Jacobson, who will lead you through this webinar. So David, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Shannon. I'd like to join Shannon in welcoming all of you who are participating in the webinar today. As Shannon mentioned, this webinar is based on a CELO report that includes case studies of the P3 work underway in Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. And the central question for this report was, how can states support P3 system building at both state and local levels? Today we have an opportunity to discuss some of the key findings from the report with a group of panelists from the 3 states. And as you'll see, the panelists have much to share about their experiences leading P3 efforts that can inform our work moving forward. So I'll start off by describing how we went about developing the case studies, and then I'll provide a short summary of the key elements of each state's approach. We'll then transition to what will be the main portion of the webinar, and that is discussing with the panelists 6 of the themes and patterns that emerged across the 3 states. We identify 9 themes and patterns in the report, and we're going to highlight 6 of them today. And then we're saving some time at the end, after I share a few resources, to respond to questions that you pose in the chat box. So as we go along, we really encourage you to write in your questions there, and we'll try to address as many of those as possible at the end. Before we go any further, I would like to introduce today's panelists. From the Lowell Public Schools, we have Pat Murphy-Painchod. From Massachusetts, we have Carol Nolan from the Department of Early Education and Care, and Donna Trainum from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. From Oregon, we have Brett Walker from the Early Learning Division, and Kara Williams from the Department of Education. And then from Pennsylvania, we have Marianne Ollie and Deborah Wise from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning. So in developing the case studies, we used 2 criteria in selecting states. First, we wanted to make sure that the state was doing significant P3 work at the state policy level on standards, assessments, workforce development, and/or leadership development. And then it was also important that the state was supporting local P3 partnerships through some type of grant program. Once we had chosen the states, I reviewed all the relevant documents the states provided and interviewed a number of P3 leaders, both state agency staff as well as at least 2 regional or local partnerships in each state. And then in each of the 3 states, we made sure that one of the local partnerships was a rural community and one was urban. I know there's a lot of interest in P3 in rural settings, but there's been less written about it. So we really wanted to make sure that we were hearing the rural perspective as well. And here I would really like to thank the state local leaders, not only in the 3 case study states, but in several other states, who generously shared their perspectives and insights with me. They were enormously helpful, very thoughtful, and all these interviewees are listed on the acknowledgement page of the report in the inside front cover. So now I will briefly describe the key elements of each state's P3 approach. And here, what I'm doing is setting the stage for a discussion with the panelists, as I said, about the themes and patterns that emerged in the study. So first, beginning with Oregon, the state legislature in Oregon created the Early Learning Division in 2013. The division is part of the Department of Education, but interestingly, both its director and its board are appointed directly by the governor. The legislature in 2013 also authorized the creation of 16 regional early learning hubs throughout the state, and this is really one of the distinctive features of Oregon's P3 landscape. The early learning hubs play an important, significant role in designing P3 strategy, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about a little bit today. In terms of policy, Oregon has worked on aligning standards pre-K to third and developing a major professional development push around those standards. And then the idea is to link that professional development to its career lattice and registry. And then, as in other states, Oregon has developed a kindergarten entry inventory. And then, in addition to these policy elements, in 2013, the Oregon legislature also approved the establishment of a grant program that is supporting P3 partnerships at the local level. It's called the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Program. And here you see the 4 goals of the program. They are abbreviated in the slide, but in their full version, it's even clearer that the explicit aim is to improve alignment between early childhood and early elementary education. And here I wanted to share a quotation about the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund from David Mandel, Oregon's Director of Policy and Research, that I think sums up pretty well the spirit of the program. The Partnership and Innovation Fund was created with the understanding that standards alignment and all the work that happens at the state level can facilitate P3 system building. But it is also critical to build relationships on the ground and partnerships on the ground at that local, almost building level. That is where P3 work has to happen if it is really going to make a difference. This program has the intentional goal of facilitating on-the-ground relationships and improving practice. So that's Oregon's P3 work in a nutshell. Turning now to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's P3 work is spearheaded by the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, OCDEL, which is jointly overseen by the Department of Education and the Department of Health. Similar to Oregon, Pennsylvania's state policy work around P3 has included aligning early learning standards and creating a kindergarten entry assessment. And then to support local P3 partnerships, Pennsylvania is using Early Learning Challenge Grant funding to implement what I think of as a 2-tiered approach. First, in the first tier, every summer, OCDEL runs a leadership development institute called Governor's Institute for cross-sector teams of teachers, administrators, and community members. This is open. The Governor's Institutes are open to communities across the state, and so they really serve as an introduction to P3 for a broad cross-section of communities. The goal of the Institute is for teams to learn about different facets of P3 work together and then do some significant planning as a team. OCDL holds the Institute 4 times in different parts of the state. I actually attended all 4 institutes this past summer and had the pleasure of witnessing the teams busy at work, taking in what they were learning, thinking through the implications for their communities, and it was exciting to see all the energy around P3 among all of these teams. And then Pennsylvania supports 50 communities in creating P3 partnerships through a Community Innovation Zone grant program. In each of these communities, unlike the teams that attend the Governor Institute, these communities all receive up to $75,000 per year for 3 years. And they focus on the 3 categories shown in the slide from the Cowers-Kaufman framework for planning, implementing, and evaluating pre-K to 3rd grade approaches. So Pennsylvania is working on P3 in these 2 different ways, running different teams through the Governor's Institutes every summer, and then supporting 50 community innovation zones for 3 years. Now turning to Massachusetts. Massachusetts has 3 departments of education working on P3 issues. And so to help coordinate this work, Massachusetts has created a Birth Through Grade 3 advisory group, which Donna Trainum will be talking about in a little while. Massachusetts has put a lot of energy into aligning early learning standards, as have Oregon and Pennsylvania, and then developing a kindergarten entry assessment. And then it has also developed a Birth to Third Grade Foundation document that has been shared throughout the state and vetted by stakeholders. And then Massachusetts is currently working on developing a comprehensive Birth Through Grade 3 policy agenda, and Donna will be talking about that as well. Like Pennsylvania, Massachusetts used Early Learning Challenge grant funding to launch 2 rounds of Birth Through Grade 3 Alignment Partnership grants. 5 communities won awards in round 1, and then these 5 plus an additional 7 won awards in round 2 for a total of 12 communities. Each round was a little bit less than 2 years long, and each community won up to $200,000 for each round. One distinctive feature of Massachusetts' work is that the grants required that grantees create a community-wide cross-sector leadership alignment team. As a result, whereas much of the work in Oregon and Pennsylvania is taking place at the level of schools and feeder preschools, in Massachusetts, the partnerships tend to operate more at the community and district level, and this is something that we'll be talking more about. We'll now transition to our discussion with our panelists of 6 of the 9 themes identified in the report. I won't read this list here, but the slide gives you a bit of a preview of the discussion that will follow, and it's included in the handout section of the GoToWebinar. So for the first theme, we've already said that the 3 states were explicit in combining state policies around P3 alignment with support for local partnerships. And they see these 2 prongs as interrelated and mutually reinforcing. And as we've seen, all of the states made aligning standards a priority. All of them have integrated social emotional, or in Pennsylvania's case, interpersonal skills into their standards frameworks. Well, Oregon is putting a lot of effort into professional development around these standards, and Massachusetts has combined what were previously 2 different sets of standards, one for pre-K and one for K, into one aligned standards document. Pennsylvania's work on standards is of interest for a few different reasons. First, they've included infant and toddler standards in their alignment efforts. Second, their interpersonal skills are aligned from infant toddler through grade 12, all the way through grade 12. And they've also created a guidance document around their standards that fleshes them out by adding related concepts, competencies, and supportive practices. So here, I would like to ask Marianne. Marianne, could you share with us some of the key lessons learned from the standards alignment work you've done in Pennsylvania?
Sure, David. I actually have 3 that I can share with the group today. The first one is, you are correct, we do have student interpersonal skills standards here in Pennsylvania, which are really elements of approaches to learning as well as social and emotional development. And they do begin with infant toddler and span through grade 12. Well, we actually released these student interpersonal skills standards, and they were posted on our Standards Align System website during a time when the PA Core standards, which are an adaptation of the Common Core, were just about to begin to be implemented across the Commonwealth. So unfortunately, at that time, there was a host of legislators and stakeholders that were against the PA Core standards. And once they saw that we had student interpersonal skills standards spanning, again, from infant toddler through grade 12 for school district programs to use, they expressed grave concern, actually saying that they felt Pennsylvania was inappropriately data mining the Commonwealth children and now requiring some sort of measurement of personality, et cetera. So these standards were removed from Pennsylvania Standards Align System website. They since, that was back in 2014, they since have currently undergone a repackaging and will shortly be sent to our legislation for review. An eventual release, which we hope would be coming next year, will actually come with a new marketing strategy as well as a toolkit that schools can reference to effectively utilize these standards in their programming. That was one of the lessons we learned. Unfortunately, it was timing. Along the same lines with the student interpersonal skills standards, we have found that elementary teachers take initial pause looking at the standards, certainly recognizing that they're extremely essential to academic learning. However, teachers are used to instructing and assessing solely in academic areas, specifically in English language arts and math in particular. We found that they don't necessarily feel competent or confident in student interpersonal skills, whether that be instructing, offering opportunities for skill practice, or assessing. So we're hoping that with the student interpersonal toolkit, that this will help to alleviate some of these fears and concerns by offering teachers effective best practices that they can use. The last thing that we've learned has actually been with our infants and toddler standards. As I mentioned earlier, PA did adopt Common Core, which is now called the Pennsylvania Core Standards. We do begin the PA Core Standards in pre-K instead of nationally they begin in kindergarten. So there was concern in ensuring our alignment of our standards work, infant toddler through grade 2, that there could be a push down of academics and a loss of what might be seen as developmentally appropriate practice. So we were sure to select very carefully a group of stakeholders to do this work of alignment to ensure that all revisions moving forward were developmentally and age appropriate. And we also offered, for the first time ever, a public comment period for 15 days in the Commonwealth. And I think that concludes.
That's great, Marianne. Thank you. You will all see that I have posted a slide. I'm showing now a slide from Pennsylvania Standards work that shows how they break the standards into concepts and competencies and supportive practices. And then I would want to flag for everyone's attention the challenge that Marianne referred to with the interpersonal skills in the elementary school level. I think that's something that we're seeing in many states. And so the interpersonal toolkit that Pennsylvania has developed will be something that may be of interest to others of you. Turning now to our second theme, P3 work in the 3 states has required that they create new formal structures to improve collaboration, as well as informal relationships across the agencies. Oregon, for instance, has created a new formal working group and maintains close relationships with several key philanthropic nonprofit organizations that have played important roles in this work. And then at a more micro level, I know Brett at the Early Learning Division and Kara at the Department of Education collaborate frequently as a result of their P3 work. Pennsylvania, likewise, has a cross-agency cabinet at the senior level, and likewise, OCDEL is collaborating more now with K3 colleagues. And then in Massachusetts, the 3 education agencies have created a Birth Through Grade 3 Advisory Council. Donna Trainum is going to share a little bit about the council. Donna, could you tell us what the role of the Birth Through Grade 3 Advisory Council has been, and then perhaps give us a few examples of the kinds of projects it's working on?
Sure, David. Thanks for the invitation to participate in today's webinar. The role of the B-3 advisory group in Massachusetts has grown and developed since it was initially constituted here in the state. As you mentioned, the B-3 group was originally brought together as a result of participation in the National Governors Association's Early Childhood Policy Academy. As an active group, we came together around the Policy Academy goals, and the membership was focused on carrying out the work of our NGA grant. Namely, we were working together to strengthen the implementation of our KEA and on developing social and emotional standards, as well as approaches to play and learning standards in the early years. As you mentioned, the Building the Foundations of Future Success for Children from Birth to Grade 3 document and beginning the conversation about a comprehensive birth to grade 3 policy agenda was fundamental to our moving that NGA work forward. In 2015, the group was renamed to be the state's B-3 advisory group and expanded its membership to include specialists in the areas of family engagement, inclusion, assessment, as well as representation from our Department of Public Health, which is under our Health and Human Service Secretariat in the state, and Head Start State Collaboration Office. The B-3 advisory group meets monthly, and at our September meeting, which just happened this past Friday, the B-3 advisory group spent the better part of its meeting discussing our work plan for the 2016-17 school year and the appropriate structure to support the implementation of that work. Our goal is to provide guidance and, where appropriate, provide support to implementing the priorities of our education and our health and human service secretariats, including work that's happening and underway on screening in the early years, workforce development, social and emotional learning, and early childhood mental health, particularly support for our state's early childhood comprehensive system, which is administered through our Department of Public Health. For this year, we will continue to function as an advisory group, and we will add subcommittees for those priority areas where we will have specific tasks, particularly in the area of communication and screening. In terms of particular projects, you mentioned a number of them, including the development of our state's new preschool and kindergarten social and emotional learning and approaches to play and learning standards, as well as the development and rollout of related professional development modules that we created, including an administrator's module and a module for professionals working with families. Additionally, we're working with the Executive Office of Education and our state's early literacy expert panel to address screening of young children, including the development and implementation of a survey to all early childhood providers in the mixed delivery system to better understand what is being used for screening tools and for what purpose. At our meeting on Friday, the advisory group determined that beginning this year, it would also like to focus its work on serving as a conduit of interagency communication so that the field receives updates of state early learning initiatives and policies in a coordinated way instead of in a siloed way, which is currently how the field hears those communications. Lastly, the B-3 advisory group serves as an advisory to our preschool expansion grant and will serve in a steering function, specifics still to be determined, for our state's early childhood comprehensive systems initiative.
That's great, Donna. Thank you for sharing that. The work in the Council in Massachusetts has an ambitious agenda. I think we're seeing similar work taking place in a number of states that are trying to coordinate their birth to third P3 work more coherently. And I think that the idea that Donna mentioned around sharing communications in a consistent manner across the agencies is really interesting. So now on to our third theme, and this has to do with the geographic level at which P3 activities are funded. In effect, we're talking about the level at which capacity is being developed. And this is something that really came out in the comparison of the three states. It wasn't something that I was expecting. I hadn't focused on a great deal previously, but it really emerged as a pattern across the three states. So most of Pennsylvania's community innovation zones are partnerships of schools and their feeder preschools. And then there are a few that are entire rural counties. And this contrasts with Massachusetts, where most of the birth through grade 3 alignment partnerships were established at the community level and involve a significant role for districts. And then again in Massachusetts, there are a couple of rural counties that are in partnerships and one collection of small towns. And then we have yet another model in Oregon where the funding goes first to regional hubs, which build capacity at that level. And then thus far, the hubs have in turn funded mostly schools and feeder preschools. So this raises a number of questions. Is it better to start with schools and feeder preschools and work up? Is it better to start with districts and the community and work down? We're beginning to see some preliminary anecdotal evidence that there may be a trade-off here. It may be faster, you may get faster movement if a principal at the school level buys in and some community-based preschool leaders, they can get moving faster. It takes perhaps longer to get the partnership up and running at the community level, but then you may be developing capacity and perhaps ensuring better odds for sustainability, perhaps. So in Massachusetts, I know some of the communities that had birth to grade 3 alignment partnerships have really bought into the work. A few have invested in a P3 position that has responsibility for spearheading the work. And we're seeing that some of the leadership alignment teams are continuing after the Early Learning Challenge grant funding has ended. So we have a couple of our panelists that will speak to this theme. And I'll start off by asking Brett Walker from Oregon. Brett, could you explain the rationale behind Oregon's early learning hubs and share some examples of the kinds of P3 work they are supporting at local levels?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David, and thank you for having us on the call today. So as you mentioned in your opening remarks, there are 16 early learning hubs in Oregon, and that those 16 hubs provide full statewide coverage, every county in the state, and they range from being kind of smaller single county organizations in parts of our state that are more densely populated to covering regions that are actually quite large multi-county areas into less densely populated or rural areas of our state. And so regional early learning hubs are essentially coordinating bodies. They're not designed to be direct service providers. They're coordinating bodies that focus on children ages birth to 3, and they are responsible for leading cross-sector collaboration with an emphasis on 3 large system-level outcomes that all of our work drives towards. And those are that families are stable and attached, that children are ready for kindergarten, and as a corollary to that, on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. And then finally, that systems are coordinated, efficient, and cost-effective. And part of the original rationale for creating early learning hubs was we as a state were, like many states around the country, investing significant dollars into children and families in the early years and not really maximizing return on investment. So that component is essential as well. One of the key factors that of early learning hubs is that they are really designed to be kind of central to cross-sector collaboration, and really focusing on collaboration between early learning and K-3 education, health and human services, the business sector, as well as nonprofits and community-based organizations. One of our directors of one of our early learning hubs describes their role as being to coordinate, collaborate, and catalyze. And I always like that because it sort of helps make it a little bit easier to conceptualize what these organizations are designed to do. Early learning hubs are accountable for achieving outcomes, but they have broad latitude in how they get there. So they each submit a work plan, annual work plan to the Early Learning Division, and the types of strategies, initiatives, investments, partnerships all look very different from one hub to the next. And so it's designed to have a lot of local control and local flexibility as a system, which it creates some challenges, but it also creates a lot of opportunities as well, and builds on a lot of local knowledge and expertise. Early learning hubs are also responsible for identifying a target population of children and families that they're seeking to serve. That should be based in data, and it should be driven by our statewide equity lens. Early learning hubs are not designed to be a universal support to every child and every family in the state necessarily, but really to focus more on those with the highest level of need. And when we talk about P3, David mentioned the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Program. That's our state general fund investment in P3 partnerships at the hub and local level. And based on most recent numbers, it looks like across the 16 early learning hubs, we're reaching well over into 100 elementary school catchment areas through that fund. And some of that work, to be perfectly honest, can be fairly light touch. But one of the things that we're finding is that it is definitely a catalyst towards creating more meaningful partnership between early learning and K-12 education, both at the very local level and between the early learning hubs and the K-12 systems in the regions that they serve. So that's something that we're pretty excited about. We're starting to see some movement in terms of the Partnership and Innovation Program funding a specific set of activities, and then those activities leading to something kind of bigger and better from a P3 perspective. The last thing that I'll note here is that we're also fortunate to have really strong partnerships with some nonprofits and philanthropic organizations in our state that also are investing in P3 partnerships at the local level, and we work closely with them to make sure that our approaches to supporting the field are coordinated and aligned. And with that, I'll leave it there for now.
That's great, Brett. Thank you. Brett mentioned this idea about the P3, the hubs and the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation program serving as a catalyst, and we'll return to that in one of our future discussions in just a little bit as we talk about pushing for impact, which I know is a topic that's of interest to us all. So thank you, Brett. Pat, I wanted to ask you to comment on the same issue. I know that the Lowell P3 partnership did work at both the neighborhood and community levels, and in that regard, it's relatively distinctive. Could you share how that came about and what kinds of activities took place at both levels?
Sure. Thanks, David, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. So in Lowell, we did approach it from both the neighborhood and community perspective. Our initial approach, we took two neighborhoods of Lowell, both neighborhoods that we felt were perhaps presented with high needs, low income, and looking at the schools that are in those two areas or those two neighborhoods. So we began with two of our elementary schools as part of our P3 work or B3 work, and we also at that time thought about the different child care centers that were operational in those same neighborhood areas as the schools, as well as any of the family child care homes that were, served by some of our systems here in Lowell that may have been within those same areas or same neighborhoods. So our focus was really looking at our community from a birth to grade 3 perspective. And we have had a long history in Lowell of solid collaboration among all entities in Lowell. So we did have a great foundation and partnerships that had already been in place. So some of this work was made easier by those existing relationships and former histories with one another. We approached our work with a real focus on program quality. So some of the project-based things that we did for this for our alignment work was conducting some common assessments across all of our areas that we were working with, both within family child care settings, center-based preschool programming, and our public school entities. We had a focus on administration of several tools, but one in particular that I think it was unique to Lowell, and that we used the class assessment tool, the classroom assessment scoring system. And this is really a focus on the level of interactions that are taking place between the teacher or the adult and the children. So this was a very unique approach here in Lowell, that we were able to conduct that class tool or class assessment across all of those mixed delivery systems. And simultaneously, there was coaching going on and also communities of practice specific to either family child care staff, center-based programming, public school staff. At the same time, the community level, we were also doing community-wide efforts around the development or continued development of a strategic plan. The council that we had in place, as I mentioned earlier, the Early Childhood Council, has continued to be part and parcel of this work, and we had identified several community-wide key areas around early childhood and the development of advocacy around early childhood, gaining more stakeholders, businesses, and local government involved in the early childhood areas. We looked at developing a common school readiness definition, brought in different people for panel discussions around that to see people's perspectives on that. We hosted a few citywide summits, which again, focusing on that early childhood, some of the brain research, some of the early childhood advocacy issues, to really permeate the community with why early childhood is so important and why we need to work across that continuum and across that mixed delivery system. So those were some of the pieces of locally in Lowell what we did as a result of our B2 3 work.
That's great, Pat. Thank you. So would just emphasize that Lowell began at the neighborhood level, and then pretty organically a lot of community level work took place as well. I'll also mention, Pat mentioned that Lowell had an early childhood advisory committee that had been at work for a long time, and that's something that I saw in all the states and a number of communities, that the partnerships really differed in terms of their history of collaboration, and that may be something that communities want to take into, states may want to take into account as they differentiate their technical assistance. And then, as Pat mentioned, Lowell used the class assessment not only at the elementary and center-based levels, but in family child care as well. And then, so that was a distinctive element as well. So as I've mentioned, in addition to the themes and patterns in the report, I make 9 recommendations to state agencies wanting to engage in this work. And one is simple and follows pretty directly from the discussion we've heard today. And that is that states should be deliberate about the level at which they want to support P3 system building. As Lowell suggests, it may not be a rigid either or, that is, neighborhood, community, or region. The question may be, when should states identify one level for funding rather than another? And then it's important to also consider a related question, which is, in your specific context, what is the best way to build district support and capacity for this work over time? So now I'd like to turn our attention to a key issue in all states, that all the states have confronted in their P3 work. And this has to do with how to support communities in ensuring that their strategies are changing practice and building systems that will lead to better outcomes for children. So leaders in all 3 states have reported a great deal of enthusiasm around what we now regard as common, even core P3 activities, joint professional development, professional learning communities, family engagement, work on transitions. And in all 3 states, there's an awareness that partnerships need time to formulate their plans and build trust, and that a great way to build trust and momentum is through early wins. But there's also a desire to see more systemic change and deeper changes in adult practice. On this point in Massachusetts, the state's early childhood advocacy organization, Strategies for Children, worked with Harvard professor Noni Lasso to support a number of the P3 partnerships and encourage them to move beyond awareness raising to include changing adult behavior as a central objective. And along these same lines, Oregon has had the benefit of an evaluation of the first year of its Kindergarten Innovation and Partnership Grant. The evaluation found a number of positive developments, professional development, lots of engagement among teachers, appreciation of the collaboration, a number of events, lots of events for families. But the evaluation also cited, and here I quote, the need for more in-depth follow-up, coaching, and mentoring support for the implementation of practice change. So Brett, wanted to ask you if you could tell us a little bit more about the study's main findings, and then your own assessment of progress at the local level. I know that you're out in the field working with these hubs and communities a lot, and some time has passed since that first year evaluation. And then if you could share with us the implications for the work of the early learning hubs and the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Program moving forward.
Sure. Well, I think you actually did a very nice job of summarizing the evaluation findings. Specifically just the qualitative pieces that I think everybody recognized, that building these partnerships takes time, and that in some senses, we have a sense of urgency to move quickly, but moving quickly at scale, it can actually create more problems than it solves in some senses. And I think where we found bright spots in terms of changing adult behavior in relation to supporting children to be ready to be successful in kindergarten, in the first year of implementation was really around the parenting education work that took place, and some of the parenting education work that took place that had a really strong focus on kindergarten readiness and supporting families to support children's learning and development at home. We already had, as a state, a pretty strong infrastructure to do that work. So I think that is, something that helped us hit the ground running with that component of the work. I do think that one of the potential challenges that we have with that work is that sometimes I think it can be easy to think about parenting education as a substitute for more systemic approaches to a broader look at family engagement and really engaging teachers and school districts and early learning providers in the family engagement process. So, that's something that we continue to work on, and we do see some promising practices in that space as well. One of our early learning hubs, for example, is investing very heavily in the parent-teacher home visit project, which I imagine people on the call are familiar with, out of Sacramento. And using that as a strategy for their kindergarten teachers to build partnerships with families before children arrive at school, and has had a lot of success with it in a short period of time. So that's something that we're really excited about. I will also say two additional thoughts. One, I think while we have a handful of examples of some successful cross-sector professional development work taking place, that has been, I think, the most challenging aspect of the work for a lot of reasons. One is just the logistical challenges of getting K-3 teachers and early learning providers in the room together on a consistent basis, as well as the differences in language and approach that the two professions have traditionally taken. And I think the other piece of that puzzle is, in doing that work, we're really asking people to change their professional practice over time. And it's a two-way street in terms of the changes that we're asking people to make, both on the early learning side and on the K-3 side. We have some positive reports in the first year evaluation that indicate that early learning providers and K-3 teachers were able to learn from each other as part of those professional learning communities, and I'm optimistic about where that work is headed. It's just taking a little bit longer to take root than some of the other aspects of our P3 work in our state, and I think it's really ultimately essential to systemic P3 work to really take place and have an impact for kids in the long run. And then the last thing I'll say, David, to the point that you raised about need for support from the field, that's something that we're really grappling with right now, is how to effectively provide coaching and technical assistance and ongoing support for the people that are implementing this work on a day-in, day-out basis across our state. Some of our early learning hubs actually fund a P3 coordinator position, where that person is essentially responsible for managing the P3 work that takes place in that hub. And that's, I think, a really good start. But even then, you're talking about one person that may, potentially be responsible for a vast geographic area and supporting many local systems simultaneously. So that's something that I think we have some work to do on. But I think that, we're having those conversations, and we're trying to figure out what the best approaches might be.
That's really helpful and interesting to hear about, Brett. And it's, as you pointed out, it's interesting that the parenting education and family engagement work is actually kind of the leading work there. I think that may be a contrast, or contrast a bit from the work that we're seeing in other states that focuses or has often focused perhaps primarily on the cross-sector professional development. And it sounds like the Early Learning Division is really thinking about how to best support that work in the field. I think you're right that the cross-sector professional development work, pushing that deeper and deeper and making that more systemic and impacting change there is a challenge. And so it's great to hear that it's something you're clearly focused on there in Oregon. So I'll now I think we can come back to this this topic. I know all the states have a lot to share on this topic, so we can come back to this in the question and answer period. But for now, I'll move on to our next theme. Another interesting finding across the 3 states has to do with what parts of the prenatal to 3rd grade continuum the partnerships are focused on. So for the report, I interviewed both community level and state leaders, as I said before, and across all of the communities, or many of the communities, the local level work often begins with collaboration between community-based preschools and district pre-K and K teachers. And hold on, I'm just going to get my pointer here. So often the work begins here, and this makes a great deal of sense. P3 began as pre-K to 3rd, and perhaps the major focus is greater collaboration between community-based preschools and elementary schools, acknowledging the logistical challenge that Brett just referred to. But the movement has broader aspirations that include 0 to 3 years old, infant and toddler care, home visiting, as well as K to 3 as well. As many of you probably know, New Jersey is doing a lot of interesting work now in the K to 3 area. Another of my recommendations in the paper is to make sure that even if communities start with the important work happening here at the pre-K case theme, and that would include the kinds of family engagement activities that Brett referred to, that it's important that we then continue to move up to working on grades K to 3rd, which often don't get as much attention as they should, and also move down to working with infant and toddlers, home visiting, parenting education, etc. So as we foreshadowed somewhat before, Lowell is unusual in that it began with a commitment to working across the continuum, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to, why we invited Lowell to share some of its experiences with you here today. So Pat, you mentioned before that Lowell began its work in 2 neighborhoods and then expanded to 3. And then in each you worked with a school, a community-based preschool, a center, and then some family child care providers. Could you tell us more about the work you did across sectors and how that work developed over time?
Sure, yes, thanks, David. With our second round of funding, we did add in a 3rd school or 3rd neighborhood to our project and expanded that way. I think when we look at that mixed delivery system, when in our second year of funding, we really did look more at that cross-participation or cross-sector participation of the mixed delivery participants to engage around the topic of family engagement. And I know some of that was just spoken about previously when it was discussed through Oregon. I believe it was Oregon. Yeah, sorry. One of the things that we looked at is in that second year, focusing on family engagement, we did a lot of education and just exploring Joyce Epstein and Karen Mapp's models of parent engagement. We had coaches in place that supported the delivery and the facilitation of communities of practice around family engagement. And what made this round unique or different from the first round is those communities of practice involved the family child care providers, the center-based staff, and the public school teachers. They would come together for that communities of practice. They probably engaged for, I think, maybe 6 to 8 sessions as communities of practice, and they looked at family engagement. I think there was a lot of evident learning and sharing of strategies and how people approached working with families and different results and outcomes that they had gotten from certain approaches. At the same time, we were also able to provide a parent education workshop series for parents. It really honed in on the skills and some of the practices that we wanted them to be aware of as their child transitioned from family child care into preschool into the public school, some of the ways that they can support their child's learning at home, some of the things that they would want to be familiar with, access to resources, sharing of ideas and strategies. So we were also looking at the parent education piece and how do we prepare parents for this transition from these different systems. So we did have, we were looking at that really again from that birth through public school or grade 3 perspective and trying to take into account the different participants in that and how family engagement might look different in each of these settings, but what are the common goals that we have and what are the outcomes that we want for families. So that was a unique perspective we had here. At the same time in round 2, because of the class assessments we had conducted, we were able to bring, again, all the participants together who had participated in the class assessments to receive a session from a summary report which shared the data from those class assessments. And I think that was also a great opportunity for different participants from the 3 sectors, family child care, center-based, and public school, to have a chance to meet with each other, talk about these the results of the assessment through the summary report. And we really found out, you know, we are more alike than we are different. Some of our same challenge areas that we see in the public schools, we see in family child care or center-based programming. So we have a unique position to be able to move forward a bit with some potential professional development across those sectors that we can build on here within the community of Lowell based on those results of the class assessments. So that's a little bit about some of the focus work we did in round 2, particularly with our family engagement, and then building a bit on those class results.
That's great, Pat. I'm curious. It's really interesting to have these groupings with family child care, center-based, and elementary school staff all together. I'm curious, what kind of feedback did you get on that? Did you hear about any challenges in facilitating those groups? Did you any kind of ahas?
I think for the most part, people really were engaged with each other. I think for many it was the first time that they may have even met a neighbor, you know, a family child care provider that works near them, or a public school teacher that works near their home. So I think for them it really was a nice bridge. And I think we tried to do similar experiences with some professional development, bringing those staff together across the community. And I think for the most part, people are really appreciative of that. They don't often have that opportunity to learn about what happens or what family child care providers are doing or what happens at the public school. So it's really broadening everyone's own vision and experience around what quality means and what does it look like in family child care, what does it look like in center-based, what does it look like in public school. And we're all working with the same children and families, so we really need to, I think, collaborate and put our efforts together to make it cohesive and the best programming across the community that we live in. So I think it was received very well. I know that teachers did learn a lot from each other, teachers and providers, and really were able to share some nice strategies, and they built some friendships. So it was really received well.
That's great to hear. Really, really interesting, Pat. So finally, moving to our final theme today, the state education agencies often contend with the issue of balancing their oversight and regulatory roles, and the desire, on the other hand, to encourage innovation and flexibility at the local level. And what's interesting is that P3 seems to bring this issue into sharp relief, perhaps because the work is still relatively new, perhaps because at its heart the movement is pushing for structural and systemic change, as we've mentioned today, and thus in some respects the movement is moving us into uncharted territory. You see here on the slides a number of quotes that came up independently from the interviewees around this issue of oversight versus local flexibility. And so the desire to devolve decision-making requires a shift in thinking. The idea over time that an agency would realize that it has to provide support, but without suggesting that there's one way to do something, saying that there's no magic bullet, And then kind of coming from a different perspective, we also heard communities saying that, well, when they come together for networking and professional development, it is important that there is some commonality across communities. So you may remember from the key elements that some of the states kind of helped direct communities to focusing on certain aspects of P3. And then down the road, when they brought them together, they would have those as commonalities for sharing and exchange. So my final question is for all the panelists, and that is, what advice do you have for state agencies as they support local P3 work and attempt to strike this balance, the right balance between oversight on the one hand and local flexibility on the other? I'll ask Pat to start us off from the local perspective on this question, and then in turn we'll hear from Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Oregon. So we'll start with you, Pat.
Okay, great. I feel like I've been hogging this a lot today, but thank you. I just have a couple of ideas that I think I wanted to present around this. You know, here in Massachusetts, and particularly in Lowell, I think we've really welcomed the flexibility that we've had to design the model that we did with our approach to looking at specific neighborhoods within the city, and then also doing some of the community-wide efforts as well. I think I think communities do need that flexibility because every community might have a different makeup or a different structure in place or collaborations in place, so that flexibility is really key. I do think it's really important, though, and I know the times that here in Massachusetts, when we were brought together as a whole state around some of the B-3 initiatives, it was really interesting to learn from the other communities that were involved in the project, so that if there were similar themes or similar approaches, you could learn some strategies or some other resources that would support your work. I think that is something, for that to happen really frequently and consistently, is really important at a state level. I think also, one thing that I think is extremely important around some of the oversight or the looking at local flexibility, one of the key areas that I know here in Lowell that I think, you know, might be a statewide piece as well, is really looking at how do we anchor school leaders, elementary school leaders, within the birth to 3 world. We've attempted many pieces here in Lowell to try to educate, provide information and resources, forums, PD, and so forth for school leaders. Which is very challenging, as we all know. There's so much on people's plates. Sometimes it's just there's not enough time in the day. I think one of the key elements that I think a state perspective could have is certainly thinking about how do we develop that at the state level? How do we provide forums for elementary principals and superintendents around the work of early childhood, and how this impacts their work in a public school and thinking about children birth through grade 3. I think that investing principals and school leaders in that is a real key piece to sustaining the work and making it go deeper. So those are just a few pieces that I wanted to contribute to that section.
That's great, Pat. Thanks. Mary Ann,
Yes.
Turning to Pennsylvania.
Yes, well, first I wanted to let you know that Deb Wise, she does send her apologies. She really wanted to get on for this particular section. However, she did have a conflict and couldn't be with us. But she wanted us to share, she wanted us to share that as in every other state, this work is still very, very much in progress, and we're learning lessons daily. We certainly understand that there is a high level of accountability to our taxpayers in ensuring this work is completed, and not just completed, but completed with fidelity. So the systems we do put into practice for monitoring should really be flexible enough to account for local community needs. And in that, monitoring does not have to be rigid and prescribed, because very often when we have prescribed monitoring, it limits effectiveness of local communities to do the work. So one thing that we have been doing here in Pennsylvania is we've been encouraging our Community Innovation Zone grantees to share more qualitative data to meet reporting requirements, such as the sharing of success stories or perhaps unexpected outcomes that may have come about. We do have a Community Innovation Zone final report, which should be released in the spring of 2018, and we'd be more than happy to share additional findings and advice at that time.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Well, that report will be really interesting to share. Carol, turning to you from the Massachusetts perspective.
Hi, David. I just wanted to make sure I'm unmuted. Thank you for inviting me. And Pat, I want to thank you for sharing all of your information, as well as Donna for some of our advisory groups. So some of the takeaways in thinking about what you've all been saying, but thinking about that whole balance of supporting local P-3 work, but also looking at the state's involvement. I think for state level structure, the collaboration piece is so key in terms of including a very diverse group of stakeholders. So what we've decided through the Birth to Grade 3, which is our statewide group, is that we expanded our membership after our NGA work. So not only do we still have a very key piece of that, the state child's advocacy organization, Strategies for Children, as one of our voices, but we've also included representatives from the Department of Public Health in looking at some of the grants that they've been working on, involving Head Start in a whole different way in terms of the collab director, but also in terms of the Mass Head Start Association, and keeping them informed. Really closely involving our partners with special ed in elementary and secondary ed, and thinking about early intervention and thinking about all the pieces, again, from the continuum, as well as our coordinated family community engagement grantees, which is unique to EEC, and that we have these local grantees who do a lot of work with families and children who are not involved in structured child care. So I think having all of those partners at the table, at least in the time that I've been doing this work in Massachusetts, I really think has been invaluable in creating that joint vision, but more importantly, the coordination of efforts at both the state and the local level. And having that advocacy organization at the table has really been able to help us because as government agencies we can't communicate to the legislators, but advocacy organizations can, as well as talking to philanthropic organizations and messaging to the communities in a different way that state agencies can. So I think that's really been key. The other is that to really have a balance of state policy efforts, both informed by, but also hearing from local communities, as Pat is saying, is really key. And I think that lessons learned, Pat, that we still have more to improve on hearing those success stories. As Pennsylvania just said, I think that's key because there are really wonderful things happening in the 12 communities across the state, and trying to get somebody to bring all that together I think is important. And last, I think that we also in Massachusetts pride ourselves on local flexibility, but also recognizing that that can be challenging, as well as Oregon, Brett, that you had mentioned. It's both challenging and an opportunity, and that in order for us to really message how we support those B-3 efforts, I think really helps overcome some of the barriers when we look at local communities. Local communities are helping us as a state to inform what those policies are going forward. And last but not least, and we heard this from Oregon as well, is to really have that flexibility and understanding that change does not come easy. We've been doing this work. We want to see changes happen quickly, and we understand that change takes time. I think in one of the quotes that was on there, David, about that you just said about changing our thinking, I think that we have in Massachusetts successfully, not across the state, but I think successfully have brought principals to the table, have brought administrators, have brought child care directors, Head Start, child care, family child care, public schools, independent providers together to really hear the messages that we're saying. And one of the examples that Donna mentioned was our social emotional standards, that for the first time we created training teams with both elementary and secondary ed and early childhood folks together to go out and train public school and early childhood. We also created administrators modules for both directors and principals to hear about what these standards were about, and also creating modules for family engagement so that families would understand when schools and programs were talking about social emotional standards and what those meant. So I think that, again, I'm proud of the work that Massachusetts has done. We still have a lot more to do, but I think having this Birth to Grade 3 advisory group is helping to keep all of the work that we're all doing in unison, as opposed to early childhood is doing this, elementary is doing this, and higher ed is doing this. We're all really at the table talking about our initiatives and thinking about how it impacts all three worlds.
Thank you, Carol. Very helpful, and you provided a great handoff to Brett. So, Brett?
Yeah, that I think I've heard a lot of themes that are also true for us out here in Oregon. I would just reiterate what I said before, which is that the early learning hub system was originally designed with a tight, loose balance in mind. So, you know, we wanted to get, as a state, really clear around the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve, and then create local flexibility on how to get there and how to use resources and partnerships and different strategies to achieve those outcomes. And we see that play out in the P3 space. Our partnership and innovation program, our state general fund investment in P3 is designed to have a lot of flexibility in mind. It is designed to support local innovation and to identify those practices that have the potential to be scaled and replicated across communities. I will say that as we're getting to the point of being 3 years into that work, and as we're learning as a state and as we're learning from what's happening around the country, we are getting more focused on what's working and wanting to focus our time, energy, resources there, as opposed to, you know, being just sort of wide open for any type of innovative approach. We want to be really smart about how we use our evaluation data, both qualitative and quantitative, to shape the work going forward. But we still want to have some space available, certainly, for early learning hubs and their local partners to design and implement strategies that are unique to their communities.
That's great. Thank you, Brett. And I think you pulled together a number of themes from our discussion so far. So before we have a few questions in the chat box, and add to them if you have additional ones. Before we begin responding to them and asking our panelists to respond to them, I'd like to draw your attention to a number of key resources. I've listed some of them here, and there are more in the report. And you will all receive this slide deck with the links here. I'd like to draw your attention to one of these resources in particular. It may be one that's less familiar, and that's the book called Strategy in Action by Curtis and City. And a caveat here, this book is written specifically for school districts. I'm suggesting that the approach described in the book, particularly in chapters 1 and 5, will be valuable for partnerships as well, but that does involve a big translation step to move from districts to partnerships. If you're interested, you can see an example of this approach in practice on my blog, the P3 Learning Hub. There's a post there, Building a Citywide Birth to Third System, and that post will link directly to a plan, a city plan, a P3 plan that draws on strategy and action and framing its recommendations. And then I would also like to share a new resource that is hot off the press. I've recently posted as a work in progress a theory of change that is intended to help focus P3 partnerships on a set of core strategies, really with the pushing for impact idea that we've talked about in mind. The idea here is to support schools and providers in mastering 5 essential competencies as they work towards improving quality and alignment. And here you see from the perspective of states, funders, and networks here. And then embedded in the theory are a number of underlying principles that help spell out the approach. As I said, this is very much a work in progress, and I invite and welcome your feedback on it. If you have thoughts to share on improving this guidance and making it as useful as possible, I encourage you to email or submit comments in the comments section of my blog. So now I will ask Shannon, turn to Shannon to see where we would like to start in terms of responding to some of the questions that have arisen.
Okay, David, thanks. This was a really lively discussion with the panelists. We do have a handful of questions from our attendees. And the first is for Marianne from Pennsylvania. We have an attendee asking you to speak about the relationship with teachers unions and perhaps teacher prep colleges as stakeholders being involved in your teaching practices document, your continuum of standards across the early childhood years.
Okay. Well, I can share specifically for higher education. We did have a good number of higher education folks in our stakeholder group at the table when we were doing revisions to our infant toddler, our pre-kindergarten, and then we just recently have refined our kindergarten grade 1 and 2 standards, which actually were printed and disseminated to all elementary schools in the Commonwealth this past August. So we did have a lot of higher education folks involved in that. Also, in regards to higher ed, we were awarded a National Governors Association grant, I believe it was back in 2013. So as we were moving forward with our approaches to learning standards and then some of our SIS work, we were able to contract out with Dr. Becky Bailey and Stephanie Jones from Harvard University, who provided a lot of feedback in regards to things that we could tweak, correlations that we could make between the two domains. So we had them involved as well. In regards to teacher unions, I'm glad whoever shared that brought that up, because certainly I can take that back to our division and we can talk about maybe how we can involve them a little bit more in some of the work that we're doing with the standards.
Great, thank you. So I know that David and Pat from Lowell talked about this a little bit in terms of collaboration. We have a question asking the state level folks to respond to about collaboration, specifically challenges to establishing cross-office or cross-unit collaboration, this idea of maybe some turf protection or siloing, so that folks can really learn from those challenges and some of the success stories you may have there in building those relationships.
Shannon, this is Carol from Massachusetts. And I can talk a little bit just about our experience. One of the pieces of advice that I was going to give to states is that I know it's more work for people and everybody has so much work on their plates, but going for opportunities like the National Governors Association project, CELO has come out with opportunities, federal TA, also Head Start National Centers. There's just a lot going on nationally. And that's what brought us together as a state, so that the 3 education agencies came together. It also needed support from the governor's office. So I think at least having one key person in those agencies to say, yes, we're going to commit to this project, getting permission from commissioners as well is also a key piece to talk about, you know, this is an important project and it's joining all of our work together. And the other piece that we were able to have is Undersecretary Ann Reale, who had worked with the federal TA, was interested in our group, came, and is now an integral part of our group. And so she's able to share with us the Secretary's priorities, things that are happening at a much higher level, and so that as state agencies we can help to carry out that work. Yes, it has been challenging in terms of coordinating people's schedules. Sometimes we have calls instead of face-to-face meetings. But I think in the long run, what we've all appreciated and gained from it has been worth the extra work and effort, and it actually is a meeting that we feel so productive when we leave with each of our charges. And so each of those agencies has taken pieces of tackling the challenging, quote, groups to get that communication out.
Thanks, Carol. Brett or Marianne, would you like to add anything to that question?
Sure, I'll jump in and would invite my colleague Kara to speak to this as well, if she's able to. You know, I think for us, so Kara and I, our job descriptions are fairly similar, and we're fortunate in that sense, where we're essentially both responsible for supporting the state's P3 system, me from the early learning side and Kara from the K-3 side. So we're fortunate to work closely together and you know, in some senses kind of be the point people for fostering that type of collaboration at the state level here in Oregon. I think we have a lot to be, you know, happy with in terms of the way that collaboration between the Early Learning Division and our State Department of Education has gone. I think that there's certainly always room for improvement. One of the things that's been on my mind has been around how we hook our P3 work in a way that's more intentional to our statewide school improvement work, for example. Kara, what would you add here?
I think the link to the school improvement work is a great one. I also see you know, linking our work more closely with special education, making sure that we're reaching out to the various offices in the department that are responsible for content areas such as reading, math. That's been certainly improved with our creation of the aligned standards, but we still have work to do there as far as making sure that we're all talking about the same thing and at the same table. So yeah, while I think we have definitely shown a lot of improvement over the last few years, I think that we still have a lot of work to do, and I think there's just a general need for awareness for folks about the P3 connection and about the importance of all being at the table together. It's really easy to get siloed in thinking about your specific subject area and not considering the fact that we really need to be including a broader range of folks at the table.
Great, thank you. So a very specific question for Massachusetts. Question asking around your Birth to 3 advisory committee that you have in place. Is there information about that online and any documents available to help guide states in their work similar to yours?
Shannon, I don't know. We had a website when we were working on the National Governors Association on that project because we were building a Birth to Grade 3, the foundation document that Donna had referenced. I don't know if that website is still active or not. I can check, but I can certainly send information to David. I guess would be the best, David?
That'd be great, yeah. Carol, that sounds great.
You?
Yeah, if you share information with me, then we'll share it with everyone who participated in the webinar.
Yeah. And I just want to let you know, Shannon, that you know, this is a voluntary group. It's quote not in anybody's job description, but we were so committed to the work from the NGA Policy Academy. So you know, you get these small grants or these projects, and then you say, oh, it's over, but it's really not over. So it was really, I just really want to thank, and I'm sure some of the B2 advisory group are listening to this, that it's the commitment of those professionals and those individuals who really want to see this alignment happening, and so we got permission from our commissioners to continue this group. So it really is a voluntary group, and we've just made it a part of our jobs and a part of the commitment that we have.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing a little more detail on that. Know that any resources that are shared with us going forward, we'll be sure to get out to the group, and also stay tuned to the CELA website. So of course this webinar will be posted, as well as other resources that come out as we work with our states through this issue. We do have another question around higher education involvement, and this is around supporting the workforce for a mixed delivery system and sustaining some of the relationships throughout the continuum of birth to grade 3. Anyone else want to speak to their relationships or partnerships with higher education?
This is Carol again. I don't want to dominate, but Massachusetts Department of Higher Ed is one of the 3 education agencies that has been part of the Birth to Grade 3 advisory group, and they have been Dr. Winnie Hagan has been very active with us in her work in looking at credentialing, in looking at what core competencies we have for Massachusetts, but also beginning work with some of you may know from the Head Start world, Early Ed U, and looking at a consistent type of course and basic training looking at early childhood educators. So Department of Higher Ed has been very involved in that, and again with the support of her commissioner. So we do have some work on that as well.
Great, thank you.
Shannon, I'm wondering if either in Pennsylvania or Oregon we have other thoughts to share on the collaboration with higher education?
I can also share that in Pennsylvania we do have higher education representatives on our Early Learning Council, which is also governor appointed. So we do collaboration in that way as well as many others, and we were thrilled, actually just recently got word that we are bringing Teach back to Pennsylvania to help continue to support the workforce.
Great.
And I think for us in Oregon, one of the main spaces where we're collaborating with higher ed is around workforce development in general, and building the capacity of the early learning workforce. With our new aligned early learning and kindergarten standards that Kara mentioned a few minutes ago, I do think there's an opportunity to collaborate with higher ed and to ensure that the educator prep programs are effectively using that as a tool to prepare both early learning providers as well as kindergarten teachers around expectations around children's standards for learning and development. But we have plenty of work to do on that front.
Great. Shannon, are there other questions?
There is another one around attendance. How does the new focus on attendance influence statewide thinking for this birth to grade 3 continuum?
Any thoughts on attendance from our panelists?
I would say for us, that's one of the things that's really front and center. It's a huge issue in our state. So some of the family engagement work that I alluded to earlier does include a component around building parent capacity around the importance of attendance in the pre-K and kindergarten years. And it's actually, one of the things that we ask about on our evaluation report is whether or not, or in the surveys, I should say, that parents and family members take as part of family engagement activities and parent education training programs that are part of the Partnership and Innovation Program at the local level. One of the things that we ask them to respond on is whether or not and how participating in those activities change their views on the importance of and supporting children's attendance in their early years.
Great. That's helpful. Any other comments on attendance? Otherwise, back to you, Shannon.
So here's a specific question for Massachusetts, again, around the birth through third advisory work that you're doing, and asking around about the coordination of that work. Is it coordinated or advisory to your preschool development grant or to your early childhood advisory council? Is there collaboration there?
So the Birth to Grade 3 advisory group is connected and shares our work with our early childhood advisory, which is through the Department of Early Education and Care and has about 30 representatives. We actually serve as the preschool grant expansion advisory. So the preschool expansion grant team comes to our meetings, hears what's going on at the state, and then they also report back. And so we're actually using that advisory and using what we're learning through our preschool expansion grant and really looking at developing a comprehensive high-quality preschool model across the state. So there's been ongoing learning and ongoing communication. I think serving as that advisory has been really helpful for everyone at the table on both sides. And in terms of how we report back, again, as I share with you, the Undersecretary of Education, who oversees all 3 education agencies, is part of those meetings, so she's able to tell us what's happening at the state level, and it's a two-way, and then we report back. So that's kind of how the communication has been happening, as well as I shared that the statewide advocacy organization Strategies for Children also sends out blogs and Twitters and information to the larger community and to early educators.
Great, thank you. So I have actually one question for myself, since I'm doing quite a bit of work here in New Jersey, especially in the K-3 realm. Brett, you mentioned something that really hit home with me on the sense of looking for coaching and technical assistance for those implementing the work, and what a challenge that can be in terms of resources and where to go. I'm curious to know if any other panelists wanted to comment on that, of how to find support for those implementing this birth to grade 3 continuum.
In Massachusetts, we have 5 communities called Educator Provider Support Grants, and so it's a piece of providing coaching. We have trained coaches who go out to programs, but we're certainly not covering across the whole state and across the whole spectrum. And for those of you that know a true coaching model and a high-quality coaching model, it can be very labor-intensive, and you want your coaches to be trained to be able to do it well. So we don't have the funding. We have dedicated a piece of our state funding toward coaching, but certainly not across the board. I know that it is part of the preschool expansion grant model, and looking at coaches, and so we've looked at coaching models across the different public schools and how they're implementing that, and looking at our early childhood models and how they compare. But we still have a ways to go in terms of actually looking at the true cost of funding coaching and what that would cost across the state.
And Shannon, this is Marianne from Pennsylvania. So this isn't really coaching, but one thing that we're doing here, we also have a storytelling project here in Pennsylvania that's in partnership with the School Readiness Consulting, basically to help community innovation zones create these meaningful stories that are aligned to the work, to state and national P3 efforts, and to Every Student Succeeds Act. So ultimately the project is intended to be creating more connections, possibly serving as mentoring for others who want to do some of this work, even attracting funders, getting P3 on agendas at city council meetings, etc.
And this is Pat and Lowell. I think also just a resource around the whole field of coaching. Again, there is a cost impact of that, but I'm not sure how many are familiar with the TORSH, T-O-R-S-H. It's actually a video platform that does support coaching, where videos can be collected by the actual practitioner themselves and feedback provided to them via a coach who could be watching at midnight or 7 a.m. and on a Sunday. But that's also just another, effective strategy, though there is cost to it. But it is also a way to provide coaching and feedback to practitioners as they're doing some of this B2 work.
Pat, thank you. This is Carol. Thank you for adding that. I thought about it afterwards. And that TORSH model was funded through one of our Race to the Top projects. So we're trying to figure out a way to help supplement that through our Educator Provider Support Grant. Mm-hmm. And it goes along also with a peer coaching model as well, that one of our staff members, Pam Rue from EEC, worked really hard on during our Race to the Top project. So thank you for sharing that, Pat. That is another model.
Yeah. Great. So just a reminder that for technical assistance, we hope that you'll reach out to CELO, as our mission is to support state agencies and partners in implementing a birth to grade 3 quality policies and practices. So we hope that you'll not only use our resources on our website, but take a look at your contact for a state representative on SELO for you and reach out to your technical assistance partner that way. As we wrap up here nearing 2:30, I wanted to take the time to thank David for this valuable paper that he's presented and for leading this informative webinar. A very special thank you to our panelists from Lowell, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. We're so grateful that you were able to share your work with us, and we look forward to hearing more developments from you as you go forward. Please look for a recording of this webinar on the SELO website, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.